My opponent's claim was that caffeine is bad for us at our young age since it'll cause health problems in the future. Her secondary claims were unclear, so I had to look at the outline, and these are the ones that I could kind of deduce from them. Excess coffee consumption can cause insomnia, anxiety, irritability, and indigestion. Caffeine has dangerous effects on the brain, and it is especially dangerous for students. My response to these claims are that her negative consequences were asserted, and there are benefits to drinking coffee. For the first point is that her claims were asserted since she had no factual data backing up how much caffeine people actually consume. So there was no way of indicating that this is an actual problem to begin with. From my own research, I found that an 8-ounce cup of coffee contains about 95 to about 165 milligrams of caffeine, and that the average coffee drinker drinks about 3.1 cups of coffee every day. Through simple math, I found that at the low end, 294 milligrams are consumed, while 511 milligrams is the max. According to the FDA, 600 milligrams a day is generally too much. That's the equivalent of 4 to 7 cups of coffee. From this, we see that even the most avid coffee drinkers are still under the bar of this line that the FDA says that from this point on, this is when you will see health problems. Continuing on, my next point is that the stated consequences are also based on the fact that caffeine alone is implied the main problem. According to Stephen Meredith of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, the effect of caffeine can vary in each individual, which may explain why there are mixed messages surrounding coffee, whether it's good or bad for us. As in my opponent declared in her speech that caffeine can have various effects on people depending on their tolerance. From her own research, I found that many of the consequences that she listed, that at the end of every section explaining the consequences, it always said, consult with your doctor, because there may be underlying problems other than the caffeine that can lead to these that you don't know about yourself. An example being that the FDA states that people with heart problems should not use caffeine because it makes their heart work harder. And people with anxiety problems or panic attacks may find that caffeine makes them feel worse. From here, we see that there are underlying conditions, pre-existing conditions that exist before the caffeine was introduced, and the caffeine made it worse. We see that the caffeine wasn't necessarily the problem, it was just an additive that made it worse. Lastly, there are health benefits to coffee. In a recent study, Johns Hopkins at the University of Baltimore found through a study that about 200 milligrams of caffeine can actually help people have long-term memory. The study was that they had about 160 students look at pictures of outside scenery. They had random students take a 200 milligram caffeine tablet and then had the rest take a placebo tablet. Placebo meaning that they told them that it was this when it really wasn't, to make them believe it was. They called in the students the next day and found that the students that took the 200 milligram caffeine tablet actually had better memory, and they continued testing this and found the various results, mainly that 200 was the optimal, and then past that, it had pretty much the same effect, but it no longer had an increase, so 200 was probably the best. From here, this is their explanation of why it works. Caffeine blocks a molecule called adenosine, which stops the prevention of another molecule known as norepinephrine. My opponent stated in her speech that that drinking caffeine makes adenosine stop being created, which forces your brain to overwork, which causes problems such as anxiety and other things of that nature. Here we see that exact process actually can create a net benefit if you use in a controlled and small dosage. Another example of practical caffeine use is that caffeine is used in a lot of medication to prevent drowsiness and numb pain, which my opponent also stated in her claim of fact speech. According to Chris Schwarzendruber of Michigan State University, research indicates that caffeine may help protect human brain cells, which lowers the risk of developing some diseases such as Parkinson's. there is a lot of research out there that states that having at least a cup of coffee a day can help prevent certain diseases from happening. The most prominent ones being certain cancers and other things of that nature. And that is the end of my speech.
Well, Julio, I appreciated your attempt to create an organizational structure for a speech that you thought was a little bit confusing. It was pretty straightforward in the way you presented it, and I thought that you did a good job on that. The analysis of what the risk levels are for caffeine was fine. The FDA criteria of 600 milligrams a day being potentially too much, that makes it easier for you to do some arguments in other places. If the average person is consuming far less than that, and even the people at the upper end are consuming less than that, then it seems like the risk factor is pretty low. One of the things that you want to do is to maybe contrast the evidence that you're citing a little bit more with what you say is the lack of evidence that the advocate presented. So point out, for instance, that there wasn't any statistical information that the advocate cited, but in the studies that you're citing, there is a statistical piece of information that talks about how effective it is at improving memory, or how effective it is at stimulating people while they are, to avoid them being drowsy during class or something like that. If you had data like that, you always want to do the contrast, because then that gives the better impression to your position. You mentioned the one study that talked about what some results would be. That's okay. Let's see. There's a little bit of discussion about the whole process that goes into this. As background information, that's fine. I'm not sure that it helps a lot in making an argument. The one thing that I thought was interesting in your argument comes from the one quote that you had, which suggests that caffeine has different effects on different people, and as a consequence, it's hard to maybe make a generalization from these points. I think you ought to point out that the advocate seems to be making these generalizations without any evidence, much less without the evidence that is coordinated or that is controlled for these variables. And I think that there are some good presses to be made here about the kinds of research that might have been done to support the advocate's position. And then I think you do have the nice argument toward the end that talks about some of the beneficial effects of caffeine. At the end of the speech, there's no summary. It just feels like you stop suddenly, and you need to plan that a little bit more if you can. This is a prepared speech, so that's something that you ought to be able to do. All right. Merci.